For thousands of years, millions of women were chained to a torture device right in their own kitchens. 9 hours every week, shoulders aching, hands raw, just to grind flour. That was the sound of stagnation. Then one day, from mud and howling wind, anonymous craftsmen decided to build a giant out of wood, a machine taller than any church, built to catch something invisible and turn it into tangible power. This isn't just the history of bread, this is the revolution that liberated time, designed by barefoot engineers, and it began by shattering the chains of the stone. Amidst the forest of concrete and glass, we easily forget the machines born from mud, fire, and sheer necessity. There was a machine that didn't need high-grade steel, only forest, wood, rubble, and the wisdom of apprenticeship, yet it fundamentally shifted the axis of history. It didn't just grind grain, it crushed social bonds, challenged the ancient privilege of those who owned rivers, and paved the way for mechanization. This is the story of the medieval windmill, an engine of the common people, built by hand, maintained by the practiced ear of a miller. It was a declaration of independence in wood and canvas. When the sails turned, the entire village stopped hunching over the rubbing stone, their servitude silenced by a new, rhythmic rumble. Time, that most precious commodity, was suddenly returned, and surplus, the concept of enough to sell, suddenly had a name. Before the wind brought salvation, the stone brought bondage. To understand the revolution, you must hear the grating sound of the quernstone, the invisible thief of time. The quernstone was the engine of stagnation. It was two heavy stones, pushed by human hands in an endless, agonizing circle. This seemingly rustic task was a domestic tyrant, consuming 2, 3, or more hours of a woman's day. For many families, this added up to 9 or 10 hours of grinding per week just to produce enough coarse flour to survive. This wasn't labor. It was a repetitive, muscle-shredding sentence, turning bread into a tax collected in muscle, sinew, and spirit. The stone-on-stone sound was the soundtrack of medieval poverty, echoing through the home. Every grain of flour was a drop of sweat, a moment of life lost. This was the hidden bottleneck of human progress. The hand busy grinding was a hand that could not spin thread, weave cloth, tend the garden, or simply rest. It was a brake on the entire household economy, locking millions in a cycle of subsistence. A more powerful solution existed: the watermill. But not every village had a river on its side. A more powerful solution did exist: the watermill. In places blessed by geography, a river's current turned massive stones with immense torque. It ground quickly if the river didn't run dry or freeze solid, but the watermill had a deeper human flaw. Its power was hoarded. River rights belonged to the feudal lord or the monastery. To use it, you paid a crippling percentage of your grain, the multure, and were often legally forced to use the lord's mill. It was a milling monopoly, enforced by law. This left thousands of villages on the flat, windswept plains of northern Europe or in hilly areas with sluggish streams completely stranded. They were stuck with the quern. Geography and law conspired to bind them at the same time. Nature was stingy with its water, and the powerful were not cheap with its access. They were trapped between a geography that offered no power and a social structure that offered no freedom. When the ground refused, the answer hung in the sky. They just needed to be bold enough to seize it. Humans had known wind power for centuries, but mostly to push things, like a sail. Far to the east, 9th century Persia had horizontal windmills, but these suited steady, unidirectional winds. In the gusty, chaotic winds of coastal Europe, a different idea was needed. A radical vision emerged in the late 12th century: the tall, horizontal axis windmill. By 1185, a document from Yorkshire confirms a windmill was standing. This wasn't the product of a single named genius. This was folk engineering at its finest, born from communal need. Carpenters, blacksmiths, and farmers, men who knew wood and weather, joined forces. They gathered to build a giant of wood and cloth, betting their precious timber and their community's time on an idea that sounded like madness, but a logical, desperate madness. The first model was the post mill, a house that could turn to face the wind. It looked simple, but it was a marvel of structural mechanics. The first model, the post mill, was a masterpiece of balance. Imagine a small wooden house, the buck perched on a single, massive central post. The entire body, weighing tons and holding all the machinery, could be physically rotated to face the wind, pushed by a man heaving a long tail pole. The genius was in the foundation. The post was supported by a trestle and diagonal braces that distributed the immense load to 4 stone piers, often using repurposed stone from ruins, keeping the post stable. The resourcefulness was staggering. The wood for the frame was the best that could be found, often massive beams salvaged from old barns or even dismantled ships. These were materials with a past life, given a new, powerful purpose. Every beam in the buck carried a history, a testament to a world where nothing was wasted. That was the structure. Inside was the mechanical heart. We must go into its guts to see their rustic genius. Inside, the machine's heart was a symphony of wood. The massive windshaft held the sails and rotated the brake wheel, a colossal gear often 10 feet across. Its teeth weren't carved, but were replaceable wooden cogs, hammered into sockets. If a cog broke, you just hammered in a new one, a modular system designed for village repair. This wheel meshed with a smaller, wallower gear, changing the rotation from horizontal to vertical and increasing the speed. The millstones were the most expensive component, ideally French burrstone, painstakingly carved with grooves to shear the grain and channel the flour. The sails were wooden frames covered in cloth. To control the power in a rising storm, the miller had to stop the mill, climb out onto the arms, and manually furl the heavy canvas. It was a job requiring immense strength and bravery. A single mistake could mean death. The post mill was clever, but limited in size. As ambitions grew, wood gave way to stone and brick. The post mill was clever, but its wooden body was vulnerable to rot, and its size was limited by the post. The tower mill, appearing as early as the late 13th century, changed the game. The innovation was separation. The body was a fixed tower of stone or brick, and only the cap at the top rotated. This meant the mill could be far bigger, stronger, and taller. It could house larger stones, multiple sets of stones, and store more grain, dramatically increasing output. A greased track under the cap allowed it to turn smoothly, at first with a tail pole or hand-cranked winch. The result was a true landmark. From afar, the tower mill became the new center of the village, a fixed point on the horizon. It was a meeting place, a vantage point, and a powerful symbol of the community's prosperity and technological pride. Centuries later, a small fantail attached to the back would make the cap turn automatically. But first, we must be clear about the timeline to avoid confusion. The final piece of the puzzle came much later. In 1745, Edmund Lee patented the fantail, a small secondary windmill mounted at the back of the cap. Its genius was its simplicity. If the wind shifted, it would hit the side of the fantail, causing it to spin. This spin powered gears that automatically turned the entire heavy cap back into the wind. It was a self-correcting, automatic guidance system. It's important to respect the timeline. This was no longer the Middle Ages, but the dawn of the Industrial Age. The medieval period birthed the post mill and introduced the tower mill. The early modern era perfected it. This long evolutionary line, stretching over 500 years, shows that the mindset of innovation never slept. It was a constant, slow-burn revolution. The machine was powerful. The question is how society changed. When the sails turned, time and power also changed hands. The social impact was seismic. A single windmill could do in 30 minutes what a family toiled for 9 hours to achieve. This was a liberation of human time and energy on a scale that is hard to comprehend. This freed time, especially for women, was a new form of capital. It could be reinvested into spinning, weaving, or market gardening, creating new streams of income. The village, for the first time, had a reliable flour surplus, breaking the ancient cycle of pure subsistence. With this new machine came a new, powerful figure, the miller. He was a combination of engineer, technician, and businessman. He had to dress the stones, read the wind, and manage the village's food supply. This unique position gave him immense prestige, but also bred deep suspicion. The stereotype of the miller with a golden thumb growing rich by pressing the scales was a common joke that held a core of anxious truth. Surplus always brings conflict. If the river belonged to the Lord, then who owned the wind? Surplus always brings conflict. Feudal lords had long locked down their milling monopolies through the ownership of rivers, but the windmill presented a profound crisis. Who owns the wind? When peasants and free towns began building their own mills, lords fought back, claiming the very wind blowing over their land was also their property. They imposed taxes, demanded permits, and sometimes tore down unlicensed windmills. This was a direct challenge to the old power structure. In the communities that won this right, the windmill became the new town square. It was a hub of commerce and gossip. Farmers waiting for their grain exchanged news, made deals, and argued politics, all to the rhythmic rumble of the stones. The mill was more than a machine, it was the village bulletin board. It didn't just grind grain, it was actively grinding down feudal structures, turning an untouchable force into a tangible, shareable common good. The sun doesn't always shine, and the wind isn't always gentle. We must look at both the risks and the safety procedures. But this power was raw and dangerous. Sails could be ripped apart in a gust, the windshaft could split, or friction could spark a fire. Worst of all was the invisible danger: flour, dust. The air in the mill would become thick with fine dust, creating a highly explosive atmosphere that a single spark could ignite. This is why the miller had a massive brake wheel, strict rules for sweeping, and a near-religious maintenance schedule. He didn't just operate the mill, he had to tame it. The miller's day began before the wind, checking the canvas, greasing the gears, and testing the brake. He ran the mill with his entire body. He listened to the cogs, felt the vibration, and smelled the flour to ensure it wasn't burning. When the wind shifted, the cap had to turn, or the sails had to be reefed immediately. A few minutes of indecision could destroy the machine, costing the miller his livelihood and the village its food supply. This entire system was a masterpiece of human-led maintenance, and this combination of risk and ingenuity leads us to the machine's final legacy.